Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I will be doing my September wrap-up. It probably does not come as a great surprise that September has not been my best reading month. I've talked about this in other videos, I kind of flagged for this to happen in my August wrap-up as well, but despite the fact that September so far is the month where I have read the least amount of books, I'm still happy with how my September reading went. I read some books I've been meaning to read, I read a couple of 2021 releases, I read a book from my Goodreads reading challenge. Basically, despite the fact that I've been super busy in September because I started a new job, I've been prepping for my apartment. I know I sound like a broken record, I'm sorry, this will end very soon. Give me a couple more weeks and then I will not talk about this anymore. And also there's been a bunch of birthdays in September, so I've been at a lot of different birthday dinners and celebrations and stuff, my own as well. September has just been a busy month, but it's been going alright. But let's just get to the stats, I'm blabbering. In September I read a total of 5 books. That means that this is the month where I have read the least amount of books. Hopefully none of the coming months through the rest of the year will have a lower number than that. And that's just my own personal preference and hope. I want to read. The issue has not been really that I have not wanted to read. I have been wanting to read. I just have had to prioritize other things than reading. But I feel like, at least through this last week or so, that I've been able to start prioritizing my reading again. As I said, in September I read a total of 5 books. If you look at audience, 3 of the books were targeted towards adults, 1 book was targeted towards young adults, and 1 book was actually a middle grade. I think it's my first middle grade of the year. I very, very rarely, never almost, read middle grade. So this is a fun thing. The YA I mentioned here, I'm not certain if I can classify it as a YA or not, but I think I can. We'll get to that. If you look at format, 4 of the books I read were physical books and 1 book was an audiobook. I definitely read more printed books this month compared to audiobooks, and I do think that this is a pattern that we'll continue to see throughout the rest of the year. I don't really have the same reading routines anymore because of my new job, meaning that I don't really listen to audiobooks anymore. That might change within a couple of months or something, I have no clue, but my current reading routine is that I'm reading words and text instead of listening to my books, and that's just how it is. Then, if you look at rating, 2 of the books I read I gave 2 stars, 1 book I gave 3 stars, and 2 books I gave 4 stars. And then genre. 1 book I read was a fantasy, 2 books were contemporaries, 1 book was a non-fiction, and 1 book was a classic. A surprising spread of the genres. I think this was my first classic of the year, and the non-fiction I read was actually a poetry book. That's the stats, let's just get to talking about the books. The first book I read in September was Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. This is the middle grade I read. It's a good book to get you out of a slump. That's what I learned. This book is a fantasy. We're following Amari. A few months back, her brother disappeared and she's having a tough time in school. Her family does not really have that much money, and ever since her brother disappeared, things have just been going downhill. But one evening, she is suddenly introduced to this new magical world. Wizards and dragons and vampires and all of that exists. And she also realizes that her brother was somehow involved with that too. And that sort of leads her to joining this magical academy. So you have the magical academy trope. I thought that this was a great read. I had a very good time reading it. And it's very fast paced. It's very entertaining. And I just had a good time. Sometimes I did feel like the story was a bit too fast-paced and that it was lacking some descriptions, and perhaps some parts should have been explored more, but I do think that that has to do with the fact that it's a middle grade. I'm more used to young adult and adult fantasies. It's not a comment on the writing was good. It's more a comment on the fact that it's a middle grade. I don't really read that many middle grades, so I can't really judge it that hard, but that's my experience at least. It was just a bit too fast-paced I guess. I really enjoyed this book and I will definitely try and check out the sequel once that one is released. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars, which in my Goodreads review rounded up to 4 stars, so this was one of my 4-star reads in September. The next book I read in September was Lord of the Flies by William Golding. This is the classic I read, and I did categorize this one as a young adult, mainly because it follows younger boys and this is something many read in like elementary school and such. So yeah, but like the themes could honestly fit any audience, I feel like. This is a classic, it's a very well-known classic. I have never read this one, but I think most of you know what it's about. It's about a group of boys who get stuck on this island and have to survive, I guess. I don't know if I went into this book with too high expectations or if I was just expecting something different, because it is a very popular book, it is very hyped, it is very well known. Obviously, people across the world read this book in elementary school and like 6th grade and stuff like that. I did have some expectations on it and unfortunately the book did not live up to them. First of all, let's just start with the premise. Like, a group of boys stuck on an island trying to survive. It sounds fun, right? It sounds like Lost or, I don't know, some other TV shows that you've probably seen with the same plot. There's other books like this as well, like adventure and fun and excitement and banter, and yeah, like the boys becoming enemies and luring out their inner beast or something. Absolutely. But this book did not deliver that. This book is about a group of like 12-year-old boys who get stuck on an island and act just like 12-year-old boys. Which, like, it makes sense, but like, there was no excitement in that. There's zero character development. The conversations and dialogues are repeated multiple times throughout the book, because basically the boys are just not listening to each other or paying attention or considering the greater issues. They're very, like, narrow-minded and focused on one thing, and that is repeated for each one of them throughout the entirety of the book. Also, none of the characters really stand out. Like, I think we get the names of like 5 or 6 characters, but in my opinion they could basically be interchangeable. They were all just, this is a 12-year-old boy, this is a 12-year-old boy, this is a 12-year-old boy. Okay, is that all I'm gonna get? For something that is declared to be a masterpiece in literature and people have read it for 60, 70 years and we continue to read it for hundreds of years, it's boring! And I know a lot of books we read in school are boring, but still. Also, I found the writing to be a bit confusing, I found the characters to be very unlikable, and I was also annoyed by the fact that we're not really given any backstories at all. At least from what the book I read. Like, I have no clue how those boys ended up on that island. They just wake up on the island on the first page. A friend of mine told me that you sort of learn it in like their dreams and stuff, in like flashbacks. I didn't notice those flashbacks, so I'm very confused. Perhaps it's just that I don't have the brain for this book, but like, come on. I'm a bit iffy about this book. Like, I'm glad I read it, because once again it is such a popular and important piece of literature. It was not an enjoyable read for me. I was bored and annoyed mostly, and I just wanted to finish it and move on to the next book. I ended up giving the book 2.5 stars, rounded it down to 2. The next book that I read was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I had this book featured in my 24-hour readathon as well, so if you have not seen that video, please check it out. I talk so much more about this book and more in depth about it. To give you a recap, this book takes place in the 80s and it's basically a house party gone wrong. We're following some siblings. Who are the kids of a very famous musician. They live in Malibu. Every year they have this epic house party. It's about the famous people, the glam, the rich, the fabulous. It's a good time, okay? This book, like the story, the main plot of this party, that story basically takes place within 24 hours. But throughout the book we're also given the backstory of the characters, about their parents, how they met, how their lives were, about their father, his decisions in life, and how the siblings lived through the majority of the years. It's in some ways a bit of a slower book, but it's so entertaining. I really enjoy this book. It's a fun treat. It's a good time to read about the lives of the rich and the famous and their scandals and stuff like that. I think it's so much fun. It's like reading a gossip magazine or something like that. This story is nothing original. We know this story, like we've heard about it before. we've met these characters before, or we have heard about them before. So it's nothing original or unique about the story. Another thing also I wanted to mention is I don't really feel like you could tell that this was taking place in the 80s. The backstories of the characters and their parents and such, sure, that played a factor that their backstories were taking place in like the 40s, 50s, 60s and so on. This house party that's taking place in the 80s, couldn't really tell. I feel like that's more of a marketing trick to be able to market it more as historical fiction. I honestly just categorize this as general fiction or contemporary because that's the vibe I got from it. I had a great time reading this one. I thought it was so much fun. I highly recommend it if you're just like looking for an escape or something like that, or if you have enjoyed Taylor Jenkins Reid's other books, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. The next book I read was Dearly by Margaret Atwood. This is the book I listened to as an audiobook, and it's actually like a poetry book. So it's a very short audiobook. It's like 1.5 hours or something like that. And I decided to listen to this one both because it was short and also because it's part of my Goodreads reading challenge that I'm doing, where I'm reading the winners of the Goodreads Choice Awards of 2020. I don't have that much to say about this one. In some ways, this is a bit uncomfortable for me because I really don't know anything about poetry. I don't really feel like I have the right to say anything about it because I don't know it. I don't understand it really. But in some ways, I still feel like I'm allowed to say what I want. Even if you don't understand something, or even if something is not necessarily made for you, I guess, you can still appreciate it if it like connects with you in some way. And this poetry collection or poetry book did not connect with me at all. I don't know if it was because I was distracted when I was listening to this one, but like nothing really stuck. And when I did focus on what I was listening to, I was mainly confused. And I didn't really like how she phrased some things. Nothing really stood out. And I found this both annoying and confusing. And I don't remember anything from this book. There was something about a wolf and something about sex. I feel like things are always about sex. So there was probably some metaphors for sex in this one. To no one's surprise, I ended up giving this book 2 stars. The final book I read in September was If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha. I also read this for my 24-hour readathon, and I actually read this in like 6 or 7 hours. It is a short book, but still, I think it's really cool. And also, can we just take a moment to appreciate the cover? I think this cover is stunning. I think it's so beautiful. I want to have it on display like this. It's something about this that just draws me in, and it's also really flat. This book follows 4 different women who lives in Seoul. You're just thrown into their lives, and every chapter is from a new woman's perspective, and it's a very slice of life, contemporary sort of thing. This one does have a lot of messages and themes regarding beauty standards, jealousy, another feminist Korean literature, which is super fun. Earlier this year read Kim Ji-jung, Born 1982, I think it's called. And that's also like slice of life, a Korean woman's story. So if you enjoyed that book, I would recommend to check this one out. I found this book to be very interesting. I understand what it was going for, but it didn't really reach all the way for me. I understand that some topics are perhaps meant to be controversial, that this is an obvious commentary on beauty standards in Korea, but I did not find this book as impactful as I thought it would be. And I think it's because it's a very flat book. It doesn't really have a start, a middle, and an end. It's more like the same pace and same events throughout the entirety of the book. You don't get any closure, you don't get any development of the story. These women are going through their lives and you're just tagging along and watching it for 300 pages. I did enjoy the writing. The writing was very easy to get into. It had a very nice flow and pace, and it did not pretend to be anything that it's not. It was never too flowery, it was never too ugly, it was just solid. So the writing is good. As I said, I read this in 6 hours and I still managed to get into it and find a good flow with it. I'm definitely curious to see what more this author might come out with in the future. I'm so keeping this book because I do think it's so stunning, and I definitely do recommend others, especially if you have enjoyed books similar to this one, to read it. I still had a good time reading it, so I'm happy I read it. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. And that's it for my wrap up. Wow, for once it's very quick at least. 5 books in September, and I am pleased with that. As I said, I read some anticipated reads, I read some 2021 releases, and like other books that I've been meaning to get to. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. Please take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye!
You gotta just go for it. Don't think about what comes after or what came before.
It's Friday night, don't judge me. I'm home alone and everyone was having drinks out and about. So I'm having a beer, okay? Good.